The Sony A7 IV came out 2 years ago. So if you're looking into it, should you still buy that camera today? My answer is yes. Alright, that's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in and thanks for watching. I'm just joking, don't go anywhere yet.
You're leaving already?
Today we'll be talking about the Sony A7 IV 2 years later, and I'll go into a little bit more detail as to why I think this might still be worth considering 2 years later. I'll also be going over a few reasons why you should not be getting this camera, so keep on watching so you find out what those reasons are. So the Sony A7 IV came out in October of 2021 and I got it as soon as it got released, and it took a few months to get it because at that time there were shortages and delays everywhere. The Sony A7 IV has been my main camera the past 2 years for both photo and video, and even though it has a few drawbacks, it doesn't really affect me for the work that I do. But this might be different for the work that you do. So take everything on this video and apply it to the stuff that you shoot and see if this camera makes sense for you and the stuff that you like to shoot. At the time of the making of this video, there's actually a strong competitor to the Sony A7 IV in the Sony A7C Mark II. In terms of pricing, the Sony A7 IV is about $2,500 and the Sony A7C Mark II, even though it's very new, it's a little bit cheaper at about $2,100. But in my opinion, there are a few reasons why I would still go with the Sony A7 IV today compared to the Sony A7C Mark II. And even though the Sony A7C Mark II packs a ton of new features, such as their new AI features, auto framing, and autofocus for all sorts of things, there are quite a few reasons that I would choose still to go for the Sony A7 IV instead of the Sony A7C Mark II. But let's talk about that in just a bit. So overheating was a main problem with the Sony A7 IV when it first came out. A lot of people did not realize this with most Sony cameras is that you have to set the temperature setting sensitivity to high for it to not give you a warning that the camera is overheating. And to be honest, with my camera, after I adjusted that setting, it has been functioning perfectly well. It has never shut down once with that setting set to high, and this camera has been to places. I've taken this camera to humid environments in Maui, it's gone to the jungle in Nepal, it's gone to the jungles of Costa Rica, and I've even taken it to the desert of Dubai. So overheating, not really an issue. But apparently there were some batches early on in the production of this camera that did have significant problems with overheating even after the sensitivity turned to high, but I believe that all of those problems have been since corrected. And if you have the Sony A7 IV and are still experiencing some of these problems with overheating, there are a few videos that I've made way back that I will link in the description below for you to check them out. Another reason why I really like this Sony A7 IV is that it is a very versatile hybrid camera for both photography and video. At this price point with a 33 megapixel sensor, you get very sharp and very nice looking images. And with 33 megapixels, you actually get a ton of pixels that will satisfy most use case scenarios. In terms of video, it shoots 4K up to 60 frames per second, albeit with a slight crop. It has 10-bit 422 color, which is great for color grading your footage, and it also has Sony S-Cinetone, which just looks great straight out of camera. But if you're new here and are enjoying this content, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already for more content from me, from yours truly. And if you are already subscribed and you came back, thanks again for being here yet again. Another thing that I've really enjoyed about this camera is its high quality LCD and viewfinder. Although the screen is not the 4D motion, flip up, flip down, and fully articulating screen that the Sony A7R5 has, it does have a fully articulating screen, which is on par with that of the Sony A7C II. One little thing to note is that the LCD screen and the viewfinder are of higher resolution than those in the Sony A7C Mark II. The next thing that I like about the Sony A7 IV is the abundance of physical buttons. And I really like this because I can set custom features to all of these buttons, and this just makes me a lot quicker when I'm out there in the field shooting both photo and video at the same time. And this is one thing that the Sony A7 Mark II doesn't have because it's a bit of a smaller body and there are less physical buttons that you can use to map to certain features that you use often. Another thing as well with this camera that I like is that you have a dual SD card slot, with one of them also supporting a CF Express Type A card, which we do not find on the Sony A7C Mark II. There is a single card slot and it only supports SD cards. Another thing too that was very welcome with this camera was the inclusion of a full-size HDMI port. Unfortunately, because the Sony A7C Mark II has a smaller body, there was probably not too much space for that, so they went back to the micro HDMI, which I do not like.
I don't like it either.
So even though there are a lot of features that I like about this camera, and I've used this camera pretty much as my main camera for both photo and video, and taken it to quite a few places around the world in the last couple of years. I use this for client work, product videos, and all of that kind of stuff that I've been doing recently. But there are a few reasons why you may not want to get the Sony A7 IV. The first one is the crop that you get when shooting in 4K 60. This is going to be a deal breaker for you if you shoot a lot of wide photography or landscape or architecture and you want the widest look that you can possibly get. I mean, you can work around this by getting an even wider lens to sort of try to compensate that crop factor. But if you really want that super wide look at 4K 60, this might not be the camera for you. Talking about frame rates and resolution, this does not have 4K 120. You have to go to a camera like the Sony A7S III that does have that. With most of my videos being delivered at 1080p 120 frames per second with 422 10-bit color, with the S&Q mode on this Sony A7 IV was enough for my shooting needs. But this might be different for you, so one thing to consider. Another thing is the rolling shutter on this camera is really bad. It doesn't really affect me because I'm mostly on a gimbal, or if I'm handheld, I'm not really moving a lot. But this is something to consider depending on the type of stuff that you shoot. And the other thing too that I mentioned earlier is that this camera does not have some of the newer features that the Sony A7C Mark II has, some of the new AI features. It's also brand new, a little bit more expensive than that camera, but you can probably find the Sony A7 IV on the used market for a bit cheaper than the brand new price of the Sony A7C Mark II. Another thing for me as well when it comes to this camera is that although it's not a big cinema camera, I can rig it up to make it look a little bit more professional for client work. And we all know that, although not accurately, clients tend to look at your level of expertise or professionalism by how big your camera is.
Big lens, big camera, that's why I'm charging you more.
And with the Sony A7C Mark II, it will take a lot of rigging to bring that up to a big enough rig that may satisfy your client. So those are my reasons why you could still consider the Sony A7 IV if you were to buy it today. All of this is going to depend on the type of work that you do. So make sure that you get the camera that best fits your workflow and all the stuff that you're trying to shoot. So that's it for me from today's video. Thanks so much for watching. And here are a few more videos on Sony cameras that you might find interesting. So I'll see you in those videos.